help and develop new sources of dimensional paving stone in the UK. So we've worked very hard to bring on this Scottish one, which is a lovely granite. A couple of sandstones, as I say, from that area. Look a bit like Yorkstone, a little bit pinkier. Again, very nice. And I think in time, that's something that will produce to a reasonable level. We recently developed and helped to bring in a green schist, which is a lovely green stone from the west of Scotland. And that's had some issues, but at the moment that's being laid at Wimbledon. I'm not sure if I'm actually allowed to say that, but I think I am. Well, too late now. So that's being laid at Wimbledon tennis courts. And I have to say, it looks stunning. It's absolutely gorgeous. But it's been a bit of a learning curve because it's a new quarry. It's never been used like this before. And there have been some hiccups along the way. But I think we're pretty much through that now. It's taken 2 years, which is what I'd roughly expect. Mm-hmm. And then just recently, we've been helping a company called Armstrong's, and they own the old Shap quarry. Now, Shap is a very unusual granite from Cumbria. It was traditionally used for sets and curbs, for a lot of cladding, a lot of plinths and cornices and things like this. And indeed, you'll see Shap all over the UK. Quite a stunning granite. There were two types, a dark one and a light one. Well, that quarry is now just starting to ramp up for dimensional stone again. It's been aggregate for a very long time. So we're going to go through some issues of fractures and things like this. But once we get out of that, and I'm helping them, in fact, I'm going up there again tomorrow, having another chat with the quarry owners, take them on sort of the next level. I'm hoping that in 6 months to a year, we'll have reasonably good production available of that, at least in smallish quantities. The issue we have with British stone is we don't have enough to cater for the demand in the UK. And we will always have to import. And that's just a fact.
Interesting. But there are new quarries coming online. Yeah,
slowly. But obviously, a lot of them are old quarries that have maybe been reopened. But the reality is we only have a very finite availability of stone that could be used for paving. Not all stones are capable of coping with the kind of rigours that they have to go through. Like you say, you've got sandstones down in Sussex, and they're lovely, but they're soft as hell. You couldn't use them for paving in any real form whatsoever. And you get that all over the UK. Indeed, there's a lot of York stones that really you can't use. So a lot of stone, you just can't use it. So yes, we have a lot of it, but we actually can't use a lot of it as well.
Right. So if we were buying, say, a bag of stones, are there things we should look out for in terms of sustainability?
A bag of stones?
Bag of stones. Pebbles.
Bag of stones.
Just a bag of stones,
That's an interesting question. Sustainability, again, what do you mean by sustainability?
Well, if I was to go and buy a bag of purple slate chips, would they have had a more intensive production process? Would they have travelled further? Would they have been imported? What kind of things should I look out for?
The chances are something like slate would have come from North Wales, and the process there would be blasted out or crushed. So not a huge amount of processing. There would be a little bit, but not a lot. If you're really worried about carbon footprint, to that extent would be in the transportation to your doorstep. And if that's a concern, then you're better off using something that is local to you. So down in Sussex, in that part of the world, then you'll probably get a flint gravel from South London, or you might even get some of the sort of sandstone gravels you get on the South Coast, Ringway, places like that. Mm-hmm. But they're different, they look different. But with pebbles and aggregates, there's so little true energy use involved in producing them that it's fairly negligible. And the reality is most of the products, they won't go straight from Wales to you. They'll end up going from Wales to maybe a bagging facility in the Midlands. That will come down to a distribution point in somewhere else, then that will get distributed to a dozen different sites, and you'll go to your local builder's merchant and you'll pick a couple of bags up. But the reality is the amount of bags you get on the lorry, it's such a small amount, it's hardly worth worrying about.
Is there a particular stone that is very efficient in its production process, in as much as every last bit of it can be used, or are they all like that?
The ideal solution for any quarry is that they use 100% of their product. The reality is it's impossible. If you have, for example, a dimensional stone, now that's a stone that is cut into 3 dimensions, then some of that will be unusable for paving or sets or cladding or curbing, whatever else. It might only be a small amount, but some of it. And when you're cutting it so that bit of the blade is being turned into dust. So actually you can't physically use all 100%. Now, I'm being a bit facetious there, I suppose, but most quarries, if they've got any sense, they will have at least 85% usage. possibly a bit more. And in many cases, even that last little bit will end up going to be crushed for aggregate or something along those lines. So generally speaking, it's pretty efficient. There are a few that aren't run that way because you can't, for whatever case it happens to be. It might have no use as an aggregate. It might just be you're going to end up with a load of random cut-up bits which end up in a pile somewhere. And indeed, we talked about Welsh Slate earlier. There was a very famous Welsh Slate company who went down the pan because they didn't manage their waste, and they ended up with, literally tens of thousands of tons of waste in the part of the quarry they actually needed to get to. There were some other issues there as well, but it is a very, very important factor. And actually, for most quarries, managing the waste is almost a bigger headache and a more important part of their business than producing the product.
The difference being the wastage that's produced there, it wouldn't go into landfill, and if it did, it's natural anyway.
Exactly. So it doesn't really matter too much from an environmental point of view. And indeed, a lot of quarries will use their waste to backfill the quarry anyway. As they dry out the bit, they finish off the bit they're working on and they're not going to use it again, they'll backfill. It's not really something to be too concerned about from a consumer's point of view.
And how does the quarrying affect natural habitats?
That all depends on the quarry. In the UK, there's an extraordinarily strict set of planning policy rules that you have to jump through. And indeed, in many cases, it's possibly too strict. The reality is you can't completely protect the local habitat. But what you can do with quarrying is create another one behind it. The biggest issue with quarrying is just keeping control of the dirt and the dust and making sure that doesn't affect the local area in one way or another. And the reality is if there are animals, the great crested newt, whatever it happens to be, that was the famous one, wasn't it? Then you have to take a decision. And the decision is it more important to have the product or to keep the great crested newt? And there will be people who think one way and people who think the other. Is there a right answer? I don't know. Thank God I don't have to make that decision. There is a massive issue with the stone industry in the UK in that it is very, very difficult to get extension for or open a new quarry.
Is it? Really
difficult. And most applications fail. Right. Often for no good reason whatsoever other than Mrs. Jones round the corner doesn't want it to open. And it's a bit of a NIMBY situation. What we have to bear in mind is we have a massive, really, really long heritage of quarrying in the UK. And if you're using stone in the UK, we've got stone buildings from 3,800 BC that are still in existence. And we use stone in the landscape back in 2000 BC. Look at Stonehenge or Callanish or places like that. So we've got a really, really long history of using stone. And we had a very, very good quarrying industry up until maybe the sort of end of the First World War. But things change and things move on, and we've lost a lot of that heritage. But conversely, we've had other products we could use in the meantime, and many of those products have been concrete-based. And I think people are now starting to become round to the understanding that, maybe concrete isn't the right thing to use, always. And sometimes it's better to dig a hole in the ground and use what nature's given us rather than dig 5 holes or 3 holes in the ground, mix it all together, heat it up, and use all that energy that's involved in that to create something we could have just dug out the ground once. So there's, obviously there's arguments for and against that. But yeah, it's a bit of an issue. And actually, for us to be able to develop, in the last 5 years, we've helped bring on, 5 new stones? 6, actually, one in Northern Ireland as well. I've forgotten about that one. That's quite a lot, to be fair. It really is quite a lot. And I think there's more acceptance now that using stuff locally is probably better in total for the country and for the world than having somebody else do it in a different country.
Yeah.
Even if that means the poor old great crested newt might have to find a new home.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is indeed.
Flooding is obviously an issue where you put in a lot of non-permeable material.
Yeah.
How could you get around this if you were laying stone?
First question I'd ask is, do you have to lay something that's non-permeable? Second question I'd ask is, do you have to actually lay anything? Obviously, the second question normally answers the first one. So if you want a hard surface of some sort, whether it be a patio or a driveway, there are ways of getting around the issues of surface drainage. Now, that could be water strained off traditionally into, channels, drainage channels, and then into retention tanks and then into the ground, or it could be then off into the sewers. And that's the issue. It's water draining off back into the main sewers and back onto the streets. If we want to keep water on site, which I think we really do, it would make a lot of sense to keep the rain on site. Then, yeah, there are ways of designing hard surfaces that are permeable. Now, traditionally, we've used quite a lot of block paving in the UK. Technically, that's permeable. The problem with it is it becomes impermeable over a period of time because the block pavers are laid so close together that the gaps, the joints fill up with dirt and detritus and it become pretty much impermeable. And indeed, often underneath the sand and or aggregate is maybe laid directly onto clay, in which point it can't go anywhere and it floods. So there's lots of issues. It's not just a case of what happens on top, it's what happens underneath, and actually that's probably more important. Now, if you can get the drainage underneath working so that it doesn't all collect in one pool, and especially down here in the southeast where we are very clay-based, that's kind of important. Then you can lay stone without cement. You can lay it with joints. You can lay it with aggregate that allows water to percolate through. And depending on how many joints you have and how big they are, will dictate how much flow of water you can have through it. It's perfectly possible to design a driveway with flags or sets that has more than enough permeability to persuade any council, and then make sure that you've got enough flow through it without any great expense. But you have to think about it. Every trade-off is a trade-off. And on the one hand, it gives you more permeability. On the other hand, it's maybe not quite as stable. So the surface has to be designed slightly differently. It's just understanding what the questions are to ask. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly doable.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly doable. And I'd encourage it, actually.
Yeah.
And I should also actually add to that, you can also lay stone bound. So there's two types. There's unbound and bound. Unbound means no cement. Bound means cement. Now, traditionally, we've always thought of unbound as being permeable. It's not always, but we assume it is for now. So you can have a permeable paving or driveway, which uses no cement. You can also have a bound paving, a patio or driveway, which does use cement, if you use the right type of mortars. So there are systems that you can do where you can use will allow that. Now, companies like Steintek have been doing it commercially for a long time. We've been developing a mortar with them. And I've been saying this for about 2 years. It's just about to come out. It really is just about to come out, probably April time, called Stonebed, which is a permeable bedding mortar. Now, this means that any moisture that does get underneath can flow away. And actually, you can lay it in such a way that the water just flows through the joints into the stonebed and then flows away. So it's perfectly doable. Mm-hmm. So if you're not comfortable with laying it loose, as we used to traditionally, or unbound, I should say, then we can do it bound.
And if you were laying it unbound, what could be one potential problem that we might have to get our heads around?
I think the main one with unbound is understanding movement, bizarrely. Not movement of water, but actually movement of the surface, i.e. the stone or paving or sets or whatever it happens to be. You need to be able to mitigate that in such a way that, example, so if you lay flags on an aggregate, and now if they're sawn flags, like a granite flag or an Indian sandstone that's been sawn, it's got a very smooth bottom. That means it can move laterally quite easily. Now, if you want to stop that, which we do, you're probably going to have to put some kind of what I call a structural spacer to create the joints and to hold them in place. Now, that system, the whole paving area is then going to have to be constrained. So at some point, you're going to have a hard edge that can't move. And I'm not talking a piece of wood or a bit of metal, because they can move and they can flex. To a degree, it's not too much of an issue, because you're going to expect some kind of movement. But you want to try to reduce it as much as possible. Whereas if, for example, we used crop sets, now crop sets are all individually random and rough, so they key into the aggregate really well. And in that case, you could actually lay them light block paving, banged up right up against each other and just fill it with the sand. Now, in time, that might not be as permeable as the paving with the joints, because the smaller joints in the sets would slowly fill up with dirt. So it's understanding what you're trying to achieve now, what you're trying to achieve in the future, what the aesthetic needs to be, and then we look at what the solutions for those are. And every site is slightly different as well. So
what is the future of stone?
Oh, it's going to outlast us. A lot. What's the future? To be honest, I still think there's going to be a greater demand for it, even than there is now. And, this is something we've seen grow in the last 40 years. The company started in 1978, so nearly 41 years now. And over that period of time, we were the first people to start importing European granites into the UK in any big way. And then one of the first people to start importing Chinese granites, and then one of the first to start importing Indian sandstones. And we've been doing this for a long time. And our whole premise, our whole company was built on solving people's problems. So we would go, somebody would say, oh, you've got